I knew a girl who printed her soul on a Xerox machine. She cut up magazine clippings, put them together with yellow tape, glue sticks, and desperation, typed it all out on a busted typewriter stolen from a thrift store in Manchester. She called it a zine. $4 to run 50 copies. Half ended up in basements. The rest got lost in the mail or rained on or passed hand to hand like some sacred disease. That's how it went in the late 80s and into the 90s. But before I dive into this, please, like, subscribe, don't be a poser. Zines weren't about fame. They were therapy on paper. They were letters to strangers, truth packed in staples, a Molotov cocktail in 8.5 by 11. You didn't read zines to feel good. You read them to remember you weren't the only one choking on the air. You didn't pitch editors. You didn't wait to be discovered. You didn't give a shit about your brand. You had something to say? You typed it. You chopped up letters like ransom notes and Xeroxed it. You sent it into the void. Sometimes you got a letter back. Sometimes you got a mixtape. Sometimes nothing. But you kept printing. Some kids made zines about punk shows and church basements and bowling alleys. Some wrote about sexual trauma, anorexia, being trans in a world that couldn't spell it. Some just wrote about being bored in the suburbs and wanting to punch the world in the throat. But it was all valid. It all mattered because it was ours, and no one was watching. We didn't invent it. Zines came from earlier fires. Sci-fi geeks in the 30s, underground press in the 60s, people cranking mimeographs in basements while the cops banged on the door. We just picked it up when it got dropped, made it louder, uglier, weirder. I mean, this wasn't Rolling Stone. It was Comet Bus. It was Fact Sheet 5. It was Slug and Lettuce. Zines didn't come with glossy covers and gatefold spreads. They came with photocopier burn marks and the smell of sweat and Kinko's toner. They didn't care about balance or journalistic integrity. They were mad little diaries and rabid manifestos. They were truth without spell check. If you were lucky, you had a friend who worked the night shift. Kinko's after midnight was church. You walked in with a manila folder full of chaos and walked out with a backpack full of purpose. The rhythm of the copy machine was music. The clunk of the collator, the hiss of the toner, the faint panic that you'd hit double-sided by accident. This was the drumbeat of the underground. No one owned these presses, so we made them ours. That's how the gospel spread. I mean, Bikini Kill didn't wait for permission. Neither did Bratmobile. They didn't care about what the record labels wanted. They cared about girls bleeding out their stories in black ink. Those Riot Grrrl zines were knives wrapped in ribbon. They hit you in the gut and you thanked them for it. Pages and pages of stories you didn't hear in health class. Assault, survival, healing, rage. Girls who'd been hurt writing back at the world that did it. These weren't just zines. They were manifestos. They were confessions. They were therapists. And if you were a girl sitting alone in a nowhere town, that Xerox beacon in the mail might have been the first time you felt like you weren't dying alone. There were music zines, poetry zines, zines about graffiti, shoplifting, straight edge, anarchy, being gay in Texas, dumpster diving, anti-police tactics, you name it. There were zines that were brilliant and zines that were trash, and sometimes they were the same one. You didn't need credentials, just nerve and the guts to be messy in public. You could be an angry queer in Utah, a burned-out punk in Detroit, a stoner in suburban Connecticut who thought about death too much and school too little. You had a voice. That was the revolution. The zine scene wasn't a scene at all. It was hundreds of scenes, tiny fractured kingdoms. Punk zines in San Pedro, anarchist zines in Minneapolis, goth zines in Providence, conspiracy zines printed in trailer parks outside Tampa, all about UFOs, Roswell, and why the moon landing was fake. You didn't trust the news. You didn't trust the government. You barely trusted yourself. But you trusted paper. You could send your zine to Fact Sheet 5, and suddenly you had pen pals in Portland and Prague. Mail came with little hand-drawn cartoons, stickers, cassette tapes, dried flowers, glitter, razor blades. It was real mail, real connection. Not followers, it was correspondence. And then the internet. Blogspot, MySpace, Facebook, the goddamn algorithm. At first it was easy, too easy. You didn't have to staple anything, you didn't have to pay postage, just click publish. But soon the walls went up. You needed engagement, hashtags, analytics. You were told what to care about, when to post, how to act. Zines were ugly and personal and full of typos. The internet wanted you branded, optimized, monetized. Zines let you fail. The web doesn't. The old Xerox gospel got drowned in hashtags and targeted ads. But it never really died. Not fully. You still see zines at radical bookstores, anarchist cafes, tucked between anti-capitalist stickers and dusty flyers for shows that may or may not have happened. You find them in the glove compartments of old cars, in milk crates under band merch, at zine fests run by college kids who still think paper has power. And they're not wrong. Zines never promised to change the world. They just promised to say something honest and say it now while it still mattered. And that kind of urgency, that kind of brutal handwritten clarity, you don't get from an app. Somewhere, tonight, in some dying strip mall off a highway no one remembers, a copy machine is still running. Some burnt-out 47-year-old who never shook the itch is printing 30 copies of a new zine about surveillance and junk food and why his therapist sucks. And he's going to send them out in envelopes with $2 bills and a post-it that says, "Thanks for reading, stranger." Because this isn't about legacy. It never was. It's about the strange, loud, quiet dignity of speaking your mind on your own terms, even if nobody's listening. Even if it's just paper. Because sometimes spilling it out on paper is enough. Thanks again. This has been Slack Signal X.